I have sat in the gallery of the Korathi Imperial Senate 11 times, and the chamber always smelled the same. Hot wax from the ceremonial braziers, ozone off the holographic risers, and underneath both the cold mineral breath of marble that never quite warms even with daylight pouring through the dome 300 feet above the floor. That morning the smell was the same. The other correspondents in the gallery were the same too. The Veskari stringer 2 seats down, half asleep behind his recording lens. The oligarch press woman, who never once looked up from her ledger. Nothing in the air told any of us it would be the last session I covered as a man who still believed restraint was the same thing as patience. I was there for the tariff dispute. Everyone was there for the tariff dispute. The human mission had refused, for the 3rd time, to amend the schedule the Senate had drafted for goods crossing the threshold gate, and the first magistrate, a tall, gray-blue Korathi named Thren, robes the color of a bruise, head elongated and faintly ridged along the crown, had made it known, through 3 intermediaries and 1 open thread on the floor, that patience among the 12 houses was not infinite. I had filed 2 stories already on the dispute, both of them some version of the same sentence. The humans will not move, and the houses cannot understand why a species with so little standing in this chamber refuses to behave like it. Senior envoy Naomi Aldrich sat where she always sat, at the long table below the tiers, hands folded, spine straight, not moving except to breathe. She had led the mission for 6 years. I had interviewed her twice, both times for 30 minutes that felt, afterward, like 10. She answered questions the way she did everything else in that chamber, exactly as much as the question required, and not 1 word more. I once asked her, off the record, whether the endless tariff sessions ever wore on her. She said the sessions were not the part that wore on anyone. She did not explain what she meant, and I did not get the chance to ask again. The Senate did not open with the tariff schedule. It opened with a charge I had not heard before, that Envoy Aldrich, in a private audience 2 weeks prior, had declined to kneel before the magistrate's seat, as protocol for petitioning species required. I watched the gallery around me go very still. A kneeling clause had never been enforced against a seated envoy in living Korathi memory. It had never needed to be. Every other delegation in 3 centuries had simply knelt. The houses read the silence in the gallery as shock at the charge. I think it was something closer to recognition. Of course she hadn't knelt. Thren did not raise his voice. That was the thing I would remember after. How quiet the whole proceeding stayed. How administrative. How the worst sentence I ever heard handed down was delivered in the same flat register as a tax ruling. He read the charge. He read the precedent, thin as it was, citing 2 cases neither of which involved a living defendant. He read the sentence. The lattice flame, an old punishment, ritual and absolute, reserved for petitioners who insulted the houses beyond the reach of fine or exile. Around the tiers, several magistrates inclined their heads in approval, the particular satisfaction of a body that believes it is finally, after years of frustration, about to be obeyed. Aldrich did not ask for clemency. She did not ask for a translator to confirm she understood, though one stood ready at her shoulder, hands folded, saying nothing. She rose when the bailiffs came for her, and for 1 moment, the only moment in the entire session, her composure cracked into something I could read. She looked up into the gallery, found me, and held my eyes for exactly as long as it took to be certain I was watching. Then she turned to the first magistrate's seat and said the only thing she said all morning. "Tell them we're coming." Not a speech, not a plea. 6 words, delivered the way she'd have read out a flight schedule, and then she let the bailiffs take her arms without resisting them. I will not describe what the lattice flame is, except to say that it took less time than I expected, that the chamber was utterly silent throughout it, and that I made myself watch every second, because I had spent 6 years writing about this woman's patience, and I owed her the small, useless courage of not looking away. Around me, members of the gallery did look away. The Veskari stringer covered his lens with one hand, The oligarch presswoman studied her ledger, as though it had suddenly become urgent. I did not look away. I have asked myself since whether that mattered to anyone but me. I no longer think it matters whether it did. When it was finished, Thren rose and addressed the chamber as though closing an ordinary session. He noted, for the record, that the human mission's conduct had necessitated a demonstration, that the houses regretted the necessity, but not the outcome, and that he expected the matter to conclude any unpleasantness over the tariff schedule going forward, since, and here several magistrates actually permitted themselves the luxury of something like satisfaction, the humans now understood precisely what the Senate would tolerate. The session adjourned early. Several houses called for refreshment to be served on the floor, which I had never once seen happen before noon. I filed nothing that day. I sat in my room above the embassy district and did not write a single sentence, because every sentence I tried collapsed under the size of what I had just watched, and because nothing about it had played out the way the Senate believed it had. The human mission did not protest. No formal note arrived at the Senate floor. No request for a body, no demand for an inquiry. The remaining staff packed their offices in near total silence over the following 2 days, boarded a single transport, and left orbit without comment. I went down to the embassy gate to watch them go, along with half the press corps, all of us waiting for somebody to say something we could file. Nobody on that transport said a word. There was nothing in their faces I could call grief, and nothing I could call anger. There was only the particular stillness of people who already knew exactly what came next, and had simply been waiting for the paperwork of grief to finish. 3 days after the transport left, I was back in the gallery. The Senate had reconvened, almost defiantly, to resume the tariff session, as though nothing required revisiting, as though a dead envoy were a closed line item. Thren was midway through a sentence about freight allocations, when the dome above the chamber, which for 3 centuries had shown nothing but the gold daylight of the home system, dimmed by half. And then, against that thinned light, the silhouettes began. Not one ship, not a squadron, a fleet that kept arriving, layer behind layer, until the dome's daylight was a thin seam between hulls, and the holographic displays ringing the chamber floor lit up uselessly, with inventory counts nobody finished reading before the numbers stopped making sense. I watched 3 magistrates rise halfway from their seats and then simply stay there, neither standing nor sitting, as if the chamber's protocol had no posture written for this. I have read, since, the logs that came out afterward, how long that fleet had already been in transit before Envoy Aldrich ever knelt or refused to kneel, how the order to move had gone out the same week the kneeling clause was first quietly raised between intermediaries, long before anyone read a charge aloud in that chamber. The Senate had not provoked a war that morning. It had simply run out the clock on a war already underway, certain right up until the dome dimmed that its own patience was the only patience in the room. Aldrich had known. That was what she meant, I think, about the sessions not being the part that wore on her. I do not know what Thren said when the fleet's shadow finally crossed the chamber floor. I was not close enough to hear, and for once in 11 sessions I did not try to get closer. I sat where I always sat, in the gallery, and I watched the first magistrate's bruise-colored robes go the same color as the dimmed light overhead, and I understood, the way Aldrich must have understood weeks before any of us, that some species mistake silence for surrender, right up until the moment it stops being either. I filed that story the same night. It was the shortest piece I ever wrote, and the only one I never had to revise. I have not been back to the gallery since. I do not think I need to be. The houses know now, precisely and permanently, what we tolerate.